we start meeting face to face. Can you hear me? Can you see me? Is my video on? How are you? This will be a sequence that we will use. Anyway, a random thought, you know, that's the problem I have with these. I have lots of random thoughts, which I will try to keep under control.
Yesterday's preliminary meeting was very productive. So I'm pretty sure that it's going to go very well. So as we said, let's give 5 more minutes for attendees to arrive. Our panel is also on YouTube as well, in our YouTube channel. It's broadcasted there. So anyone who has problem with the Zoom or anything else, they can watch it from YouTube. So it will be also available through our website today afterwards, after the panel. So it's on. What else can I say? Meetings are going well in Turla Meetings Children's. I'll talk about that a little bit. We were thinking it will be a good idea on November, when we first done Turla Meetings, that having a children's fair, books rights fair, because what we've seen, children's publishers arrived first when we inform publishers about Turla Meetings. They were very keen on that more questions were coming. They were making appointments, so it was in their interest. So we said maybe in springtime, where we used to go to Bologna for book fair, we can have one, even if it's an online one. We can come together and have the conversation going. So we've decided and prepared. Then afterwards, it was a bit like fairs are coming back. We will be traveling. Hopes are on this and that. I said, okay, this fair is going to be a small one. Maybe this time an online one will be cancelled. But anyway, if we can travel, that's better. But it didn't go that way. So we realized it was still a good idea. And now after the first day, what I realized, appointments went well. Still, we have things to talk about, books to share. So I'm glad that we've done that. So I
think the idea of the concept of an online fair should be continued even after the ability to travel, and the ability to attend Bologna or Frankfurt or Beijing or whichever fairs people go to. I think the online concept is actually a very good one that could be expanded, and there needs. I think that those who established this concept at the very beginning will benefit if they can maintain the momentum and build on what was the initial success and just keep building and keep building. I think a lot of people who are buying rights, for instance, they go to Frankfurt, they go to Bologna, and they almost bankrupt themselves in doing so. The cost of attending Bologna for a small publisher from India or from Brazil or wherever it may be, it's astronomical. You know, with the actual the flights, the hotels, etc., etc. So I think there's a very, very big base of potential buyers for children's literature, for rights buyers as much as anything, for them to use an online system where we can share the content online very, very easily. And we're still doing face-to-face. It's just that we're not meeting in the bars or the restaurants anymore. The face-to-face is still a strong element of it. And as we've become more accustomed to using Zoom and other video platforms, this has now become the norm. So none of us feel as aliens in using this as we might have done before. So I think this should continue. My personal thoughts on this, the opinion, is that we should continue this and expand it, grow it into a much bigger concept.
What do you think about the the software we are using, the interface, the website, is it user-friendly when you put your books or catalogs in your profile page and make your appointments? You are also a user.
I think that we need to have more in the way of categories.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the thing where you just put everything on and you have no control over where it appears, what order it appears in. And the categories is the area that I think we really need to look at, because when you have new books, you want them to appear at the top, but maybe you've got an older book that you want to emphasize on that particular meeting, and that book needs to come to the top. More control over how we upload the content, I think, would be the thing. And also, to be frank, there are quite a number of people who have joined, who have registered on the website and put no data whatsoever. They have no information on there whatsoever. It's just their name. I don't see how that is useful. For me, as someone trying to sell rights for my books, I want to know something about the people that I'm initially contacting. There is also the issue of people signing up as only sellers. You know, I mean, I know that's an issue for me personally as a right seller, because, you know, I need access to people that are buying rights more than I do those that are selling rights. But that's a different thing. That's different. As it grows, so it will expand into that, I think. But I think the ability to arrange content, the ability to manipulate our content would be
more control over your personal profile site.
The content itself, the books themselves, how we upload them, perhaps having a book of the day option, book of the month, whatever it may be, where we can promote a particular book that we're excited about. Methods of communication, I don't think there's a problem with that. I don't think.
Okay, let's start. It's nearly 15 past. Welcome everyone to our panel. Today's panel is about multidisciplinary cooperations in children's literature. And I'd like to introduce my panelists first. Professor Karen Coates from Cambridge University. Hi. Dr. Shireen Kradia from Dar es Salaam Publishing. David Simpson from Sigma Publishing. Thanks for joining us. Today, yes, we are talking about multidisciplinary cooperations in children's literature. When you hear the title, it says a lot of things. It feels quite general. But what we aim to do today is looking at children's literature and publishing from different perspectives of an academician, a publisher, a writer's point of view, and have some meaningful discussion about where children's content going, how it's growing, and this will help understand the business as well, not only how to produce content, but also doing the business and the future of the business as well. So I prepared questions. Yesterday we had a preliminary meeting and I realized that we have plenty to talk about on this subject, and it will go that way. So it's not only questions and answers, but also we will have things to say to each other when it goes through. I will start. Yesterday, what I realized that what we talk about is what is a good book for children's literature. What makes a book a good book from all of these perspectives, from an academician's, from a publisher's, from a writer's perspective. Of course, they're not here, but from reader's perspective as well. From that point of view, I would like to open this discussion with Professor Karen Coates and ask the question, what is the motive when you say this book is a good book, and how empirical research could provide a point in decision-making of publishers or writers to choose the right story for children?
Well, I think well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to be on the panel. But yeah, this is a question that can't be answered in kind of a one size fits all answer. That different, I think what we need, and I guess this is my little pitch for publishers, that they need to have people on their staff who have an awareness of child development and the different kinds of what I would say calls of concern, the existential problems that children are trying to solve at different ages of their life. And I would stress there that that's not a one and done thing, that, you know, that every time you come into a new situation, you have to reestablish what's important to you, what kind of initiatives you can take, what kind of, all of the kinds of things that go into a developmental logic that says, right now, I'm just interested in who I can trust, right? So you've got the going to school books that talk about who's trustworthy and what the character might be going through. There's also temperamental concerns. You know, we've got books that are about these very antic children versus these very calm children, and we need both of those books because they're both those kinds of kids in the world. So we can't make assumptions about individual children, but we can have an awareness that different things concern kids at different times and periods of their life. They're trying to solve different problems. Like, what can I do in the world? That's a very interesting and important concern for children in that kind of primary school age, what Erickson called the industry versus inferiority stage, where they're trying to figure out, well, it's not just enough to know that computers exist. How do I make them? And who made them? And what was that person like? So they need that kind of nonfiction support of, so they need to both dream, but then they also need to some practical advice. And then that becomes very different as they move into adolescence and think about, you know, how does my body being responded to, and how can I use that in an effective way? All of those kinds of things are important to consider when we're thinking about what makes a good book for children. We tend to focus a lot on representation of group identities. And that's what the social media is all about now. It's trying to control that. And so looking for, I mean, a good story doesn't follow a script. A script, stories emerge when scripts are violated, right? And so there's this tension there between presenting a representative story, but then also presenting a person who breaks the mold. So there's all kinds of considerations that go into this. I can tell a little story.
You said new didacticism. Yeah, I remember that. I took that note as well.
Yeah. I was saying that there is kind of, I've come up with this term that might be offensive to some, but I call it hipster piety. You know, back in the day, we were all concerned that that books were too didactic because they were trying to inculcate certain religious values or whatever. And nowadays, our new religions are very secular religions, the religion of climate, the religion of race, the religion of, you know, all of these kinds of things. And so there is this real emphasis on what I would call a new didacticism, telling kids how they should think about families, how they should think about the climate, how they should think about this, about what they should eat and what they shouldn't eat, all of those kinds of things. And it's made a lot of the literature, especially for very young children, kind of boring, because it's not, we're not seeing children do interesting things. We are trying to preach to them, and we're letting that show in a lot of the stories that I've seen, whether they're for young kids or even the dystopian trend in young adult literature is still, this is how you should be thinking, and this is what you should be doing to make the world a better place according to the adults who are writing the books. So, yeah.
Okay, Shireen, I'd like to give the same question to you as well. How do you decide when it comes to the story, this one should be published, or this is a good story, from a publisher's, or also you're an academic as well, from a publisher's point of view? How do you make that decision? To which data gives you that idea?
So Here is where I will, first of all, good morning, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this lovely group and lovely discussion. Here is where I would be holding different kinds of hats, because I did my studies in the UK, so I know how the UK industry works, publishing industry works, and I did a comparison between the UK and the Arab world. So I saw how different things can work in different locations and how business models can't really be the same. And I did my studies and research there, and I teach children's literature. So if you tell me what is a good book, so if I'm looking at it from the perspective of somebody who's studied in the UK, then we would go into the details of the art, how it supports the text and how the text is good and it's providing something new. It's creative. There's something about it. You know, it's not any book. It's a book. It's you are happy to read it as an adult as much as a child. And there's something in the illustration. So you go back to it again and again and again, and then you enjoy it. But as a publisher, a good book should do that and should sell well, because sometimes you have beautiful, amazing book and nobody wants to read them. So is it really a good book in a publisher's perspective? So this is another question you would ask. And there are other books that do well somewhere else in the world, but they don't do well in our part of the world. So people are not liking it. What's happening? And then you come to another marketing thing in the Arab world, where the fact is most of the books purchased for children are by adults. So the consumer is not our customer in most of the time. So this is where we think about it. Who's buying the book and what's the agenda behind buying the books for the children? So when children go to a book fair with their parents and they choose their own books, this is amazing. But once somebody chooses their books and then there's another question about it. So what's a good book? I hope it's a book that combines a beautiful text, something new. Illustrations do things in a beautiful way to accompany the book. If they are picture books, it sells well, it wins an award, and everybody is happy. And it's translated maybe to another language. It's another criteria that publishers would like to have. So if a book is translated, so
And
this is, I
so,
think, my perspective for the time being.
Do you think local content local content gets stronger these days in global industry?
In our part of the world, there is a lot of demand for local content. I'll tell you why. Because when publishing industry started in the Arab world, a big percentage of the books, like when I did a research in 2000, more than 50% of the books were translations. So people wanted the children to have an original content. So now there's like a movement towards, okay, we don't want translated books, we want original books. So there is a demand for original books now. So it depends on the country, on what they need, on the artwork, on how relevant it is, and who's buying the books. For example, if you're saying novelty books, usually it is most of the time translations, because with the co-editions and people print in China, so it's something that's really feasible for international publishers. But once it's something that's talking about your own country, I think it's better to be local, not translated.
How is the chance of independent publishers in international markets?
And from the Arab world, you mean?
Yeah, from local to global. What's the chance of independent publishers to be in the system?
And I think it's very hard for smaller independent publishers now. The world is becoming like a big place. Big publishing houses are getting things. So what do you think? From I think Karim's perspective or from David's perspective, how well do you know about Arab publishing industry, or do you see Arab publishers anywhere?
Yeah, the American Library Association has an award for a translated book, but getting the books translated into English is very difficult. I mean, the pool from which we choose is very small, unfortunately, because of the way the publishing industry works. I mean, if you make a huge amount of money on a big best-selling book, then you can take a risk on a book that might not sell well, but you have to have that kind of capital to even pick up an independent book. I mean, this is like say a publisher like Scholastic has to have a lot of money that they can, and an editor who's willing to take a risk in order to do that kind of translating work.
David, question goes to
Exactly.
you. You were talking about content. Content is changing now. You said more of the consumer based content is coming. What do you think? Where does content go?
Well, I think that up until the mid-2000s, most content consumed by children was chosen and created by adults. And we kind of imposed the rules that we as adults felt were applicable to what our children should read and what they should view and what they should consume in terms of media. And then the mid-2000s came along, and along with it, we had user-generated content. And that, I think, created a sea change in the way that children make decisions about what they want to consume for entertainment and for information. If you go onto YouTube, you're going to see videos of people super gluing their hands to their heads. And we as adults look at that and we think, why? But children don't. Children go and they look at that and they think it's funny. And then they seek more videos of that same kind. And the fact that they are choosing that content is where the interest may lie for us, because we need to figure out how can we get them to choose content that we think is, as adults, is generated with children in mind. To go back to your earlier question, it kind of ties into that. How do I choose what I write? I think of the children first. I want them to be entertained. I think what entertains children of a certain age group that maybe I'm writing for, and then I want them to ask questions about the book itself, about the story, about the characters, about whatever there is in the book. Because for me, that's the core reason for writing is entertainment first. We must entertain first, but then we must get our children to ask questions. And when we look at the user-generated content, that's not really getting them to ask questions. It's simply feeding them with content. There's no question behind it. There's no information that they're gaining from this. That's not to say that children don't use social media for good purposes. It's not to say that at all. But I think that we have this new element, this new paradigm in terms of how children see entertainment and how they see things that influence them and get them to make decisions. And that's where I think we need to be very careful. And as publishers and academics and as writers, we really need to take notice of this. We need to see that our children they're born into a world of smartphones and tablets. They don't know the world without it. It's never been part of their world to say, what will I watch today? There's so much for them to consume on television, on games systems, on social media, on the internet. They don't have to make the choice anymore. They can just switch something on and it's there. The problem is a lot of that is the user-generated content, which doesn't really do the job that we as content creators try to do ourselves. But we can't stop it. We can't stop the tidal wave. It's constant and it's growing. What we need to do is to figure out what our place is in it. And so it's a case of saying, what do I choose to write? I have to look at the kids and say, what do they want to read? I can no longer say, I think this is good for children. I can no longer just say that. I now have to say, why would they choose to read my book over watching a video of a man sticking a carrot up his nose? Why? What are they going to choose? I have to make my content applicable to their lives.
It's interesting because one of the projects that is going on in some education programs is going back to Ezra's question about empirical research. It's kind of this sort of professor over shoulder look at the way children promote content to each other in chat rooms and on Goodreads and places like that, and then taking what they're interested in and turning that into educational resources. Rather than starting from the fact that, like David said, this top down, this is what I think you should do, and this is what I think you should look at. These education researchers are looking at what children are doing, how they market to each other, the content that they consume, and then say, okay, well, now how can we start there with their interests and turn that into the kind of curricula that we want to move them past that and to get them to ask those questions. So it's as important from our perspective to generate a conversation around the content that they're already consuming in a way. Now, how we translate that into books is a really interesting question, especially for those of you who are content creators.
I think something that Shireen said.
Do you think the industry is open to that, taking that research to the decision of publishing? Does that multidisciplinary cooperation goes?
I think it can work, not so much necessarily with writers, unless they are willing to set aside some of their, and let's face it, ego. Writers have egos, and I think that's a natural part of being a writer. And you need to set aside some of that ego, some of that thing of saying, I know what children like. We need to be able to listen to other voices and to take into account what experts are telling us, because most of us as children's writers, we're not necessarily experts in the field of children, and we need to listen to people. We need to listen especially to psychologists and those in the fields of study of children, what they're telling us about the way children's thinking processes are adapting and how they make choices compared to children 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. One thing that Shireen said was very interesting for me, and that was about children at book fairs, at the retail book fairs. At the Istanbul Book Fair, one of my favorite things to see is when parents give money to children and say, go and buy books. When you see the comparison of the children compared to the children who are being dragged around by their parents and told, you will buy this book, you will read this book. When you see the difference in excitement levels of the children who are rushing around between the stands, and they're buying books often at random. I'm not suggesting they're buying the right books that we think they should buy. They're buying books at random. They're looking at the covers. They're thinking, oh, this might be a good story. But to me, that's the exciting part, watching children choose their books. Because to me, that's where the drive for the future of children's literature should come from. It should be watching the children. So those book fairs, I think.
But I think, yeah.
Sorry, go on.
But I think really few children choose books. Yeah, very few children choose to buy their books by themselves. This is where the big question comes. And I've done my PhD thesis was about what are people looking for in book fairs. So I went to book fairs and I did those questionnaires with parents. And it turned out in the Arab world, in Arab book fairs, around 80 or 90% of the people want the topic of the book. So it's what is it talking about? Is it something that interests them? They want their children to read. So this is how they're choosing it. Usually it's not the cover, not the author, not the illustrator. So it's something that they want to give the children. But this, at the same time, I want to go back to the way you see things. When children are exposed to media and they see something on TikTok and then they just watch and then it becomes nice and then they look for something similar. But it's the original thing that created the trend. Why should publishing follow what other media is doing and not start a trend that can be followed somewhere else? I know it's hard, but there's always that thing that starts. I think in publishing, it happens in the same way. Sometimes somebody creates a book about a magician, or maybe when Harry Potter was popular, then you found so many other authors writing something similar, so it became a trend. So I think the success in the publishing industry is the book or the idea that creates a trend behind it. Books with magicians, books that are pink, books with sound. So I think every time you go to a book fair, you see everything, and then you can find the trend. Every year there's something happening. It's a trend. So I think also it's something we have to keep in mind.
Well, first of all, I'm not suggesting that
What
we
do you
should.
think?
I'm not suggesting that we should base our children's books on the content created by YouTubers or TikTokers.
No, I know. I'm just seeing it from a different perspective. I know you're not saying that. I didn't mean that.
But I think that if you watch Nickelodeon, this is something that when my children were young, I used to watch Nickelodeon with them, and I used to watch programs like Uncle Grandpa. And
Shireen, we can't hear you.
Your microphone is off, Shireen.
Yeah, your microphone.
Yeah, I'm because I'm hearing you. I'm not speaking.
Okay, sorry.
This is why I turned it off.
So I used to watch the programs that my children watched, and there was a program called Uncle Grandpa, which I mentioned yesterday. Which, if you look on YouTube, search for Uncle Grandpa, and then be amazed at the insanity of the program. And so, program makers, television program makers, content makers, they followed a pattern which kind of fitted in a little bit with the user-generated content concept, which is anything goes almost, within a pattern, within a structure anyway. I'm not suggesting that publishers should do that. We still need to have the stories that we heard as children. We still need to have the traditional story elements. We need to have heroes. We need to have bad guys. We need to have princesses and dragons. Of course, we still need to have that because children still like that. It's not that they don't like it. My point behind this is that the information that children are receiving, which helps to drive their choices, now has another element, and we need to understand that element.
Well, I think that's part of what research can help do is to look at, kind of just go 30,000 miles out and say, okay, what are the structures here? I mean, one of the things that we know from aesthetic education, aesthetic theory, is that children like bright colors. Babies track to movement more than they track to still images. A baby will anticipate, even a very small child will anticipate a movement, which is something that is replicated in an unstable angle in an illustration because they're completing that in their minds. So I think that understanding how children's minds work would help us understand not only why this content that is so antic, I guess is what I would say, is appealing and random. But also understanding we have to, in some ways, take responsibility, especially as publishers of print text, taking some responsibility for redirecting the timing of the duration. We need to pay attention to duration. This idea of being able to be immersed in a book is something that is really challenged by what David's talking about, the immediacy of click and see, click and see, click and see, rather than doing the work of reading a book, sustaining attention from the beginning of a sentence to the end of a sentence, tracking the drama of a turning page that you actually physically, haptically had to turn. These are all really important skills that we are in danger of losing. And that this is, I think, in Shireen's point, this is what the unique possibilities of print text that we need to preserve and enhance. And I think that, again, you need to have research to back that up, or you're not going to get the buy-in from parents, publishers, even kids, to convince them that, hey, this is something good. It's a different way of thinking, but it's a necessary one. Oh, Ezra.
In my notes, I see some points, dot points that I took notes, mostly relevant to what you talked about yesterday. I just read some of them, and I think that conversation pops up again. One of them is epistemology of self. One of them is duty of care. One of them is slightly beyond today for children. These three, what are the bells ringing when you hear these? Do we have a duty of care towards children? What they're going to read and what effects it will have towards the future? Are they going to be good readers? Do they love books when they start reading these content? Or what's for future, because they're thinkers of future. So content of today should serve to that as well. What's your point of view towards that? Let's start with Karen.
Can I? Oh, okay.
Yeah, of course.
Shireen, fine. Go ahead, Shireen.
No, I'm just going to say that some ideas are a bit cultural, if you want to think about it, because I think definitely the UK perspective of seeing this is a bit different than how you see it from different parts of the world. So duty of care would apply differently in different parts. So Karen, you please go ahead and tell us how do you see it, and then I can talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, two things that struck me from one of the things that David said yesterday is that one of the things that that he feels makes a good book is a relatability of a character. And I think that having characters, I mean, one of the advantages of a print text is this is the place where you're going to be able to get inside a character's head in ways that they don't happen on media, because you're just getting what they say, rather than an author kind of filling in gaps of what they're thinking and how they're thinking about a problem that they might be having. So this is part of that epistemology of the self, to kind of realize, how do we know what we know? How do we language what we're feeling? How do we move beyond our immediate circumstances into the mind of someone else to help us then reflect back on what we're thinking and how we're understanding a situation? How we might grieve, for instance, the loss of, I mean, there's so much death in children's literature, and it almost acts like a vaccine against when that might happen to us. How would we handle it? And so those are kinds of things that are how we get to know ourselves. We get to know ourselves through characters. And so the more diverse characters that we encounter in fiction, the more possibilities we have for understanding ourselves differently. So I think that that's got to be framed, because the way we construct a self today has to do with almost choosing from among many cultural models that are made available to us, I guess is what I would say. And a lot of those models come from books. And then there's something else, but I'll let David talk.
Well, for me, it's more about questions, encouraging questioning about elements of life, everything to do with life, society, personal trends, personal values. We need our children to be asking us questions, because we may end up just repeating back to them what they already know. And then that distracts them from what they don't know, what they need to ask about. And so as a writer, the first thing I want to make sure I do in my books is that I encourage a conversation between the children and the readers and the parents or the teachers or their peers, whoever it may be. That to me is the thing, always the way forward. It's the looking forward part of writing, is thinking, if I write this, what question would a child ask? And is it a question that can be answered by, and I hate to say this, I hate to put it like this, but is it a question that can be answered by somebody who is not necessarily particularly well educated? Because, you know, we want children of all backgrounds to be reading books, but I don't want those readers to be asking questions that the parents can't answer. So that may sound a little bit like I'm looking down on people, but it's not the case. I'm just trying to say, I want everybody to be included in this story. I want everybody to be included in the interest of children and what they want to learn and the questions that they want to answer. In terms of duty of care, we have a huge duty of care to our children, to all children, to make sure that they have the knowledge that they need to become successful adults. Successful, not, I don't just mean in their careers, but I mean in themselves, successful in themselves. So if they ask themselves a question, am I happy? They can answer, yes, I am. And as publishers and writers and academics in this field, it's very important that we ensure that our content gives children the opportunity to develop, to learn what they need to learn, not what we think they need to learn. And the problem here for me is the change that we are going through right now, in society. And it's a huge change. I'm not sure there's been a change like this for a very long time, where the flow of information is so heavy. There's so much of it and it's so different from the information that we learned as children that I'm not sure how well we are prepared to cope with the duty of care going forward with children. What do they need to know? The question of, for example, the passing of a loved one and how do you explain it? That will remain forever. That's never going to go away. But society itself has changed so much that our children's lives in the future will be so different from our lives and compared to our parents and our grandparents' lives as well. And I'm not sure that we are prepared to create the content that is needed to prepare our children for the future, if that makes any sense. It probably doesn't, but.
Yeah, but I have to say something here. So you're saying the content that prepares children for the future. I think what we need to do is, what we want to do is to have the child in the way they think. So I think it's the content that helps the child think in a different way. So you will not, it's how you think about things, because the things that will happen in the future might be too, you might not guess them all. So I think it's the books that help children think in a different way and be creative and be able to handle that challenge. And there's something else. We've talked about learning, but I would love always to have fun as something there, because for me the basic aim of children's literature is fun, because in the Arab world it's usually always learning behind the book. So I always want the book that's fun, that's nice, that the child wants to come to go back to. And you've said something about what they want to learn. I don't think that children really know what they want to learn, because for them the easiest thing is to stay on to watch TV all the time and do things or see things from a different perspective. So I think it's what our duty is, to expose them to a rich environment where they can see the possibilities of how to interact and learn from whatever the situations they can see. We give them a book about somebody else, and so that they will a bit know about empathy and feel with others. So I don't think they know what they don't know what they want. It's how we give it to them, maybe. And also another point, I come from part of the world where the Western the West has a lot of influence on us. So something else that's part of our duty is to have books with our heritage, our culture, our traditions on how we do things. So this is another, I think, a duty that as Arab publishers we have to preserve in a way or another, because everything is Westernized now. The cartoons, what they watch on TV, the media, everything is Western. So we part of what we like to do and we do is keep those kind of traditions or the things that makes us in a way or another, because globalization is there if we like it or not. So yeah, these are my perspectives for now.
Yeah, and I think that part of that, part of preserving traditions is also paying attention to story structures. Because one of, a Western story structure might be very different from a different kind of story structure. It has a different telos, it has a different chronotope, the way we think about space and time and the supernatural and the natural world, and all of those kinds of things are embedded in these stories. So learning how to recognize even what constitutes a story. This is one of the reasons why it's so difficult to diversify Western storytelling, is because you almost get like this visceral feeling of what makes a story, what is a beginning, what's a middle, what's an end, and it has to have a resolution and all of those things. And it's like, okay, how far is that related to natural cycles of breathing and eating, and how far that is an imposed cycle or not even a cycle, an imposed telos. All of those things are really interesting and fascinating and perpetuated by the books that children learn and the stories they hear in all the very different ways, in all the different intake of stories that they get in those very early. This is what sets their aesthetic. This is what helps them understand who they are through the language that we use or that we offer to them. So it's a huge responsibility in terms of duty of care. It's a huge responsibility, and it is concerning because David talks about questions. I had a student and we had a conversation about challenging books that didn't have traditional endings, books that left open-ended questions. And one of my students was like, well, I wouldn't share this with a child because I wouldn't know how to answer those questions. And I'm like, is that the important thing? Or is it important that you listen to them asking the questions, that you let them know that there's some ambiguity here? Don't be afraid of your children's questions just because you might not have the answers to them. And that's a training, maybe because of the way we were raised, that we were always supposed to have answers to questions, but they're not now. And so that's a kind of future-oriented thing.
An interesting point on that is a book that we have, which is, I'm not going to name it, I'm not going to promote anything here. It's a book without words. But it's a very detailed, the illustrations are very, very detailed. And the idea is at the back of the book, the children write their own story by going through the book and choosing it for themselves. And that's exactly what that is. That is about children asking themselves questions and providing answers themselves, but occasionally coming to you and saying, well, what do you think? Is this picture relevant to this? Is it like this? Is it like this? And it encourages that questioning. And I think you're right, Shireen. Maybe I wasn't quite clear on that in terms of saying, encouraging them to ask questions and then having to know the answers. No, you're right. The most important thing is that they're asking the questions. That's undoubtedly the most important point of that.
I've done some children's television before. What we value was watching with parents. It's quite similar to that as well, reading with parents or reading with adults. And that's a conversation starter. The book starts the conversation. If Shireen agrees with me, in Oriental stories, not necessarily a resolution is there. It's mostly an open end that you start thinking and talking and try to get the idea from what you read through the story.
In publishing, we've seen that books without endings, children really don't like them, so they try to avoid them the way or another. So again, it's what they want to get and what they want to buy, and because I teach family and child welfare, so we always talk about bibliotherapy too. So we have to really see the power of children's books in helping children open up and trust adults and talk about things and get over the trauma. So I think the world of literature is amazing, and any book, even if it's ending, it opens a conversation. You can always talk about it. You can always stop in the middle and ask. You can always stop at the end and ask, how would you change things? We can talk about it. So not always, it's not always keeping it open. It's about, I think, how adults work with children and talk and discuss the books with them. Do you agree, Karen? What do you think, or David?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think that yesterday we were talking about the research that Joseph Tobin has done with children talking about film and saying that we need to get away from effects research, this idea that somehow this book is going to have an effect on a child. And because he's like, it's a small piece of a puzzle, and that children are learning the scripts that matter at the kitchen table. And so talking to kids and helping adults to talk with their children about books gives them frameworks for having those kinds of deeper discussions, right? Not being afraid of it. I think the books open up the possibility, because stories aren't sermons. They aren't, preaching, and most stories aren't even parables. But even if they are, they encourage that kind of questioning, and we have to really, it's so sad to see a parent and a child walking and the parents looking at their phone instead of looking out around the world around them and engaging them in conversation. And it's that same kind of thing that we have to really fight against. Shirley Bryce Heath did a book where she went back 30 years later to a community that she had done, and she said you would just the lack of conversation since the advent of the iPhone or the phone in the last 10 to 12 years is just amazing. Kids and parents aren't talking to each other. So if we can get them talking around books, this could be a very good thing. But I don't know I don't know how we evangelize in that way.
So can't we say that another criteria for a good book is that it can open a conversation between adults and children?
Absolutely.
That's second on my list of requirements for when I'm writing a book. I want people to talk about it, even if it's to tell me how terrible it is. It doesn't matter, at least they're talking about it. That will always be the priority. But I think that we're looking at the problem of parents and children not talking as much as they used to. As much as it may be a horrible thing to think, I think that's the world in which we live, and it's likely to continue and get worse. I think we have to figure out how we live within that. We're not going to go back. You can't put anything back in the box. It's out there and it's running rampant. We have to figure out what our place is in that, and how do we fit our content into it in a way that it encourages reading of books. Parents are not going to put their phones down. They're not going to do it. It doesn't matter how many psychiatrists, psychologists, specialists, how many studies are published to say it's not a good thing. It's not going to stop. They still want to look at their Facebook. They want to see how many likes they've had for their last picture of their dinner. That's the world. And so, yeah, we do need to think very carefully about how we can work within that rather than trying to change it. I think it's a lost cause trying to change it.
Can I ask you a question? Do you
Of course.
Before you write children's books, do you let children see them and get their perspective before you publish them, or while you're reading writing them?
No, mostly I don't. Now, and I know that there is a lot of arrogance in that. There is a great deal of arrogance in me writing that the illustrator does their job. We published a book, and then there is an expectation that children will like the book, which is extremely arrogant, and it's very ego-driven. Sure, we do need to sit down with kids and say, what do you think about this? But what was said very earlier on here about kids being individuals and them all liking very different things, that's the problem with doing this, because what's the size of the group that you randomly choose to look at the book and give their opinions? What we do, we go to schools and we read our books out at schools. That gives us the indication if whether that particular book was going in the right direction. If kids come up to us and give us hugs because they love the character, okay, the character's good. The character's good. If they come up to us and they say, what happened about this character? What happened about that character? That's okay for me. That's a good book. And I can continue in that vein. I don't have to stop. I'm going in the right direction. But it's so random what children choose to read and what they enjoy and don't enjoy. And to be honest, maybe they had a bad night's sleep. Maybe they're hungry. Maybe they want to go and play on their PlayStation, so they'll say anything you want to hear. I think it's a difficult thing using children as a focus group.
Karen, you said research with children earlier. What about those? Do you think that academia does that research on children as content choosers? Enough research on that?
Not enough. It is an emergent question that we're working on. I mean, there's a book that's in progress right now that has this kind of ethos about it, to say that we need to stop doing so much research on children and start doing research with children, and really listening to how they respond to things and interpreting that smartly. I mean, it doesn't abdicate our responsibility. We don't take what they say without thinking it through and thinking about why they say it. that's what research is. It's about interpretation. It's not of your data, not necessarily just presenting your data as such. So that idea, I know that, like, I know in the United States, which is where I've spent most of my life, we have Children's Choice Awards, and every state has their Children's Choice Awards where they have shortlisting and they have mock Newbery panels and mock awards panels and things like that. And they even have little films that kids make, again, content creator, that are in conjunction with some of those Children's Choice Awards. So that work is being done. Now, whether anybody's doing actual research on it in the way like Shireen did, where she actually went to book fairs and talked to people, I'm not sure that they, that meta level of doing the research on how that process is working and how many children participate and what kinds of children participate and how they're encouraged to participate by their parents or not, how they're supported in that I'm not seeing research on that to the extent that there needs to be. I'm not saying there isn't any out there, but we need to be doing more of that, researching with children rather than, just kind of making some assumptions about group dynamics that we don't have evidence for. I mean, and that's what happens on social media, right? That social media is full of opinions. They are not vetted. They are not researched based. They're not evidence based. They're gut based. And then how many likes did you get? How can I amplify my voice? How can I, create clickbait that make me more important in the world? And that, that's actually having a bad effect. I mean, publishers, you should know this. That's actually having a bad effect on professional review journals. All of the social media stuff, the professional review journals, which I worked on one for 15 years, that one is probably going to die after the current editor retires, because it's just not accessed as much now as Goodreads, which is, not staffed by children's librarians and academicians and people with advanced degrees in literary analysis. That's going to go away. And so you're going to lose that bit as far as assessing quality and what people should spend their money on. So
that's the question of reality versus truth.
Yeah.
Reality does not nurture the truth all the time, unfortunately.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Similar to the other stuff as well. Okay, I'll look at my notes if we missed anything that we plan to talk about. Okay, the direct question. You said some research is done, and David said, I see what they love to read, and it directs me. Shireen said, not only children's choice, but also parents' choice as well. So what do they choose? Could you tell me that what kind of content they choose? What's popular? What's I'm not asking what's good. What do they choose right now? And a personal question for each of you: what should have been that's been chosen? The reality and the truth. I don't know if I formalize well, but yeah.
My view on this is quite simple. Children should read what they want to read, especially at a very young age. I want them to want to read. I want them to enjoy reading. And when I'm asked by some parents, what books should I buy for my children? I say you shouldn't be buying any books for your children. Your children should be buying their books. You take them to the bookshop, you go along the shelves with them, and then you let them choose a book. Obviously, within certain, very, very loose parameters. But I don't think we should be trying to direct at a very young age their reading habits. We want them to have a reading habit. That's the most important thing. And so I know from my own experience with my own kids, we had one book. I must have read it 100 times. And it wasn't a particularly good book, but they loved it. They absolutely loved it. It's not a book that I would necessarily have chosen for them, but they loved it. And we just kept reading it over and over and over again. And that's my view on this. It's a very simplistic view, I know, but children should read the books they want to read.
Okay.
And
How about
parents
you,
should
Shirin?
try to step back.
How about you, Shirin? What parents buy or what children read?
It's really shocking when it comes to the ground, because sometimes you publish books and you say, oh, these are amazing books, the quality, and they should do well, and then the sales are really shocking. And then there are other books that they just sell well and you didn't really put it in mind. So for example, one of our book that sells well with parents is a book that's called I Should Listen to My Mom. So mothers like to buy these books because it's all about how children should behave when mothers are there.
I need that for my 28-year-old.
Our bestseller was a pink book for girls. Yeah, exactly. And another, it's just a book, with the series, and then it does well. It's pink. It's the way that the character is wearing, and then it did well. So it's shocking. It's shocking what they like and what they choose, and others choose it changes in every Arab world, but there are some things that are maybe more common. But it all depends on the topic again. What is it discussing? Is it discussing technology now, and then it would sell more than it should sell somewhere else? I would love if the more very twisted ending, something that's funny. This is the kind of books I would wish that would sell more well. But these are the books that I will keep on doing, because this is where I think literature should have a point. But this is the other books that sell well. The books that sell well are the books with titles and topics that interest adults in the time being. So now it's hygiene, now that they are interested to buy for their children.
Yes, Karen, question goes to you.
So what I find with children now, they're looking for books in series. And I think part of that has to do with the idea that their lives are so complicated. And so they need some place to go that is predictable, a town or a character that they can keep going back to, or even a character type that they can keep going back to. So that's part of it, the series books, but then also something that's a mix of humor and horror, which I think is really interesting, because what I found with, especially with kids who are just starting to choose their own books around 6, 7 years old, they're looking for the scare. They want to court an emotional response, whether it be humor, well, almost always humor. They want to laugh, which again, when their lives are getting more complex, that combination of being able to collect a set, which is like a series, gives them a sense of mastery and control. Like I've read all 7 books in this series, or I've read, Phoebe and Her Unicorn, I've read all of them and I want more. It's that kind of continuity that they're looking for, but also that blend of humor, a little bit of irony. They're starting to learn irony. And so they're relatable. The other thing that I'm finding more is they're looking more at that, the graphic narrative, the comics style, which is the sequential narrative. That's something that's incredibly popular with kids today. Just because maybe because it replicates a screen, maybe, that the sequence, the moving through the sequence, and they're filling that gap in with their YouTube eyes.
They're animating from the page.
Exactly. My own daughter used to do that in church. She would make a full-scale comics of what was going on around her, which is a little irreverent, but
Hey, at least the imagination is firing on all cylinders. That's the important thing.
Exactly.
The imagination is working.
Exactly.
Now, the thing is, what we haven't mentioned here about this is the work of illustrators, in terms of how they contribute massively to the success of a book, in terms of creating that horror or that humor, the visual aspect of children's books. To me, it rates, it's not just equal to the actual text. In many cases, it's actually more important than the text itself, because the children's eyes, we've all watched children reading books, illustrated books. Their eyes go straight to the illustrations. There's a 3 or 4 second study period. Then it comes to the text, and then they read the text, but they can't wait to turn the page to see the next illustration. The text is it's something they have to get through. It's almost the peas on the plate. Mm-hmm. If they don't eat the peas, they can't have their dessert. And sometimes the text is the peas, and they want the illustrations. And I think that in terms of how they choose books, illustrations certainly take a major role in children's choices more than in parents or adults' choices.
True. Okay, it's almost, not almost, beyond 1 hour. It's good. So I think I have to close the session today, but it was great to talk to you about all these fascinating ideas. What I realized is this conversation should go on in those multidisciplinary areas, and so productive that even this 1 hour gave me so much ideas and focus, who is not in the middle of the publishing. I'm not a writer, not a publisher, but yeah, in the service in this area. But even this hour of listening to different perspectives gives me this much of questions, ideas, and focus. This conversation should go on. I hope that we can continue on doing this in the future as well. Thank you for participating, all of you.
Well, thank you for having us. Thank you. And
Thank you,
Sebla, for your translation. Thank you very much.
Sebla was translating through the session to Turkish.
Well, it was delightful being here with all of you and sharing ideas. Thank you.
It's been great fun. It's been great fun. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Okay, this is the end of our panel. Thank you for participating and watching us as well. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.